Parkside, I know Dave's up here. Hi, thanks for being here, guys. Atomic, Steph or Lauren, anybody from Atomic here today? No, couldn't make it. We have Black Twig, Tom Gaddy, where you at, buddy? Over here on the side, thank you. And we're gonna hear from Tom here in just a second. CMA Jamie, I saw you just a second ago, there she is. And then Paul from Polsinelli, Paul Klug right here. So could we have a round of applause for our sponsors, please? You probably saw on your way in on the name tag table that there is some information from our sponsors. Please feel free to grab anything on the way out. There's some really good information and some pens and pencils and notepads, just everything you can imagine. There's also some information there on the Midwest manufacturing leaders. So if you're not in the LinkedIn group, or if you're not on the email or anything along those lines, grab one of those pamphlets or one of the cards in the middle of your table and take it with you. Okay, so today, one of our sponsors, Tom Gaddy, is going to tell us about the upcoming Midwest E-Commerce Summit that is happening the 29th of this month. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. It's going to be at the City Museum on the 29th of this month, and it's Midwest E-Commerce Summit. So don't make the name scary, because it's not just for retailers and people who are selling product. As we all know, people in the manufacturing space and the distribution space, there are plenty of opportunities for you to put the product out on the line, so people can start that. So it's more competitive now than it has been. It continues to become more that competitive nature. So there's a lot to be talked about. There's a lot of big companies doing e-commerce. They're one of the leaders in e-commerce. So very quickly, if you have questions about it, you can go to Midwest E-Commerce, midwestecommerce.com, or you let me know, I'll send you a link to it as well. We'd love to have you, everyone come, learn some things.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Tom. Much appreciated. So if you're into the e-commerce space, omni-channel space, if you're a manufacturer who is selling online, if you're a distributor, if you're in the industrial space, anything along those lines, there's going to be lots of great information, and it's going to be a really cool event, and it is at the City Museum. So it's going to be a real cool space as well. So thank you, Tom. Okay, on to the main event here. So Mr. Robert Cujo Teschner is a retired F-15, F-22 fighter pilot. He is also a former F-15 weapons school instructor, the U.S. Air Force Top Gun School, F-22 fighter squadron commander, senior joint staff officer, and a combat veteran. He holds advanced degrees in operational art and science and national security strategy. And he has extensive experience in operational and tactical planning, as well as organizational leadership. From 2004 through mid-2006, he served as U.S. Air Force's expert in post-mission debriefing, the methodology used by high-performing military teams to self-correct and improve continuously. He retired immediately after pinning on full colonel and started a leadership and teamwork training company based in St. Louis, Missouri, called VMAX Group. VMAX Group is constantly bringing high-performance capabilities to the business space to help organizations build and develop real teams. VMAX Group's purpose is to teach and inspire real teamwork so that teams can thrive in disruption and keep America's economy strong. Mr. Teschner is a multiple award-winning fighter aviator and leader, an award-winning writer and author of the national best-selling book, Debrief to Win. If you could, please join me in welcoming Rob to the stage.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Appreciate the kind introduction. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's great to be in your midst. I'm fired up to be here. Why? Because I'm home for a week. I'm actually in St. Louis, and those few of you who know me know how important it is for me to be here. I miss this place. It's my adopted home. Dad was born and raised in St. Louis. The Teschners have been in this town since 1907, but despite the fact that we live here, I'm gone pretty much every week of the year. Isn't that right, Jennifer? Yeah, the one person who checks in on me on a regular basis knows that I'm never. So to be here today is a very special event. I've got so much on my mind. Knowing that we're kicking off the end of this week, talking about teamwork, it fires me up. I asked if I could have the next 17 and a half hours to pour into you everything that I know. The answer was no, Cujo, please shut up in about 45 minutes. So I will try to do that. That's going to be tough. Which leads me to this question. How many of you have seen me speak before? Okay, a few hands have gone up. That's actually pretty cool since I'm never here. I'm impressed. My guess, though, is that those of you that have seen me speak before haven't seen me in a while. It's been a little bit since we've gotten together in this kind of a format. And if you think back to what's happened since the last time that we've seen each other, the world's gone a little bit cattywampus, hasn't it? I mean, as we're leading our organizations right now, we reflect on the fact that we're in the midst of an ongoing great resignation, a mass resignation of people leaving the traditional places of employment, going someplace else for a number of different reasons. And in the midst of the great resignation, we also find that a lot of people that are showing up to work are using your internet to figure out where they're going to go next. Disengagement is at all-time highs. Gallup reports that only 32% of employees are engaged at work right now. That was current as of April, so relatively recent information. That's down 4 points from last July. I was working with a company not too long ago in Orlando. They said, Cujo, we're at 50% engagement. We're doing something right. Like, this whole thing is wrong. Now, if you reflect this happy Friday morning on why this might be the case, maybe you realize that everybody here is to some degree potentially partially complicit. When you ask people why it is that they're leaving the places that they used to work at, a lot of them say it's because of leadership and it's because of the culture that we have here. Now think about that for a second. How many leaders do we have in the room today? Everybody raises their hand. Yeah, okay. So that's a tough reflection, leadership and the cultures that we're creating. Where's Cujo going with this? Here's where I'm going with this. I've been a student of leadership since I was 17 years old. The United States Air Force Academy is a leadership laboratory. Its ambition is to raise leaders, to graduate leaders, not political scientists or mechanical engineers. And I empathize with you. I think right now is the hardest time in our lifetimes to be called to lead. And I don't care what it is that you do. Just think about the implications of a black swan event that we call COVID-19. A nasty virus that comes out 3 years ago, and it turns the world upside down, doesn't it? No, there's nothing there. It's a black screen. How dare you advance my slides? Just kidding. Look at that. Always trying to help out, provide mutual support, make sure that things are good. I'm a contrarian. I use black slides from time to time. One of the implications of this now endemic is the widening and the deepening of the various fractures that pre-existed it. And it strikes me, being on the road constantly, going from coast to coast, that right now we are in the United States of America on two sides of a great divide. And the other side of that divide is wrong. And there's very little inclination to try to find middle ground with the other side of this divide. We're pointing fingers at one another, aren't we? And we're being told daily how wrong the other side is, aren't we? And that's a tough environment within which to lead, isn't it? And then you add to that the fact that it seems like the news gets worse day by day. How many of us have throttled back on the amount of news that we consume only because the messaging seems so negative constantly? Yeah, that's a standard reflection that I get no matter where it is that I go and speak. And that includes Germany, Canada, Dominican Republic. An international audience feels the same way. And one of the demands that's placed on us in the midst of news that seems to get worse daily, in the midst of widening fractures that seem to be getting deeper constantly, is this: your teammates are looking to you for hope in a better tomorrow. And that's a tough burden to take on. When you're scrambling to try to keep the doors open, the lights on, to grow this thing appropriately, even in the midst of rising costs, supply chain disruptions, government regulation, you pick what the stressors are. There's so many of them now. But your teammates are looking to you for hope. And if you're struggling with that, if you reflect from time to time how unfair of a burden that is, I would offer you some hope. And the hope is in studying those who live in this domain to figure out what techniques, what principles do they use to maintain their hope as they continue to navigate disruption. It just so happens that my background, one that Tom was so kind to introduce you with, or myself with, was centered around this. Having hope in a better tomorrow, regardless of what it is that's happening to us today. And that's what I'd like to talk about with you. for the next couple, 3 minutes. And there's a flight path to this vision of hope that I will summarize only due to the constraints of time as follows. I believe that if we want to get to this kind of a reality, we need to make sure that the team is centered on one shared mission. We need to make sure that everybody on the team is centered around its common purpose. We need to make sure that if our core values are indeed important to us, that we're living them and that we're holding ourselves accountable for all of the above. Today, it's a four-part flight path, with the ambition being to make tomorrow better than today, only always. And I'd like to break this flight path down into its 4 component parts and start by talking about the centrality of mission, a mission focus, a mission orientation. And in order to discuss this, I think it's very important that we understand what a team is, because it's teams that go out there and execute the mission, isn't it? Which then leads to this interesting question: what's a team? I'm on the road pretty much every week of the year. I'm usually in multiple cities every week, which is it's a real logistical nightmare. Every place that I go, I ask the same question. Hey, leader, what's a team? And people sometimes struggle with the answer. CEOs sometimes struggle with what the answer is. But I'll tell you, 99.9% of the time, the answer that's returned to me is, Cujo, it's a group of people working towards a common goal. Does that sound about right? Okay, good. What I'll tell you is it's insufficient. I'm a bit of a contrarian. When I wrote my first book, Debrief to Win, my ambition was to reverse engineer a fighter squadron, to figure out what makes a fighter squadron so consistently successful, despite the fact that we're working in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment with a really young workforce that's constantly rotating out. And I couldn't just say if I was to teach fighter squadron stuff, trust me, just do whatever it is that I did, it's going to work. I had to go back and do some reverse engineering. In order to write my first book, I did a ton of research. And one of the books that influenced the writing of Debrief to Win did so because the 2 authors, John Katzenbach and Doug Smith, spent 20 years studying teams, specifically business teams. And the definition that they write in their book, The Wisdom of Teams, seemed most satisfying to me. Why? Because it reminded me of what it was that I lived as a fighter pilot. John Katzenbach and Doug Smith say that a team is a small group of people. They cap the size at 25. They say that more than 25 people on the team and voices will be lost. They say this small group of people is hired because of their complementary skills. And what I would offer is their associated diversity of thought. We want people to think different. Apple made that really popular in the 1980s, didn't they? Then they said that this small group of people with complementary skills needs to share commitment to a common purpose, a purpose that precedes the goals that they set. And then they need to have an approach for how it is that they do the work that they do, that they ritualize, and they need to hold themselves accountable, only always for all of the above. They say it's a 6-part definition, and they say that if you're missing one of those parts, you're not a team. Maybe a reflection for us on the drive out of here, somewhere around 9-ish o'clock, is my team a team measured against that standard? And I hope that you're able to get to a quick no. Why? Well, one, you probably never had that standard before, so there's zero expectation that you're going to be meeting a non-acknowledged standard. And 2, as good as you guys are right now, imagine how much better you could be if you had all 6. Then I'll share with you how it is that I've seen that definition applied in my life. And I'll go back and I'll begin with how it was that the Air Force organized teams when I was a young lieutenant and captain. Back when I showed up at the 58th Fighter Squadron flying the mighty F-15 Eagle, hand assembled here in St. Louis, Missouri. I might add more on that in a minute. A fighter squadron was one entity where everybody worked for one commander. So who's everybody? That's your ops side. Those are primarily your pilots, a little bit of intel, a little bit of life support, and then a huge concentration of maintenance, the folks taking care of the airplane. About 350 to 400 people in a squadron. And we did everything together. And it was awkward. We used to have these mandatory fun events, Friday afternoons and Saturday afternoons. We had to go to picnics. We had to play softball against one another. And those picnics kind of were like high school dances. Pilots hung out over here. Maintenance hung out over here. It took a little while, usually a few beers before anybody decided to talk to the others. But then eventually we started to talk to each other, and then we got to know one another. And knowing one another, we had some empathy for one another, and we just kind of accepted that that's the way it was. We took it for granted. But those were happy days. because our commander made sure that we were in alignment on where we were going and how we were going to get there. It was about 2 squadrons in that the Air Force divorced ops and maintenance. They said for a number of reasons, it's going to be better for us if the pilots work for their own commander and the maintainers work for a separate commander. I mean, we're all still the same team, right? We're all wearing the same uniform, right? This ought to work out great for us, right? Here's what I would tell you, and I do not in any way represent the United States Air Force these days. I found that this little divorce introduced some fissures. Why? I think at a very basic level, we were organized towards separate purposes, kind of different goals that were tied to those purposes. On the ops side, what a fighter pilot would tell you is we atrophy our skills very, very quickly. And so in order for us to maintain our abilities, we got to fly more. Yeah, it's fun, but actually it's about skills. We have to be ready to go out there and dominate. We've got to fly more in order to keep our skills up. Maintenance, on the other hand, they're measured by how many fly-worthy airplanes we have. What they'll tell you is when we fly airplanes, we break them. So the best thing to do with an airplane that's capable of flying is to sit it. Now, because we no longer hang out any longer, there's no real reason for the awkward softball games or whatnot, you might say. Ops starts to have suspicion about maintenance. How come they're not giving us enough airplanes? How come they're not allowing us to fly more? Maintenance is developing suspicions about ops. Every time those pilots go up there and fly, they break airplanes. And now the internal dialogue starts to lead people to point fingers at one another. And interestingly, in that domain, the one unifier is going downrange into combat, which is not how it's supposed to be. But fortunately, at least the pressure of combat drives us back together again. Do you experience that kind of rift in your organizations? Yeah, I would imagine so. I was working with a company not too long ago. We'll say that they're in the Pacific Northwest. They're not, but just to protect the innocent, that's what we'll say. And I was privileged to get a chance to watch their team accountability sessions throughout a particular day. And the first team that came in to practice accountability in front of me to get some coaching from me was their IT team. Their IT team came in, a young 3-person fired up IT team. They said, Cujo, we're here to celebrate a victory. We're so excited to have achieved dominance. And we'll summarize our situation as follows. Marketing gave us a mission. The mission was to go install 4 TVs at every store location across the state in advance of the holiday sales season to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our marketing campaign. So we did what you taught us. We planned from the target backwards. We said, how much time do we have prior to the holiday sales season? How much time can we afford to be at every location to make sure we get the job done on time? And we set an objective, no more than 3 hours on site. And then we executed with passion, and Cujo, it worked. We installed every one of those 4 TVs at every one of the stores across the state. We did it in advance of the holiday sales season, and marketing's through the roof. It feels good to achieve mission success. They left with smiles on their faces. And the CEO was happy. The next team that comes in, it's the store manager and her team from one of the store locations across the state. And the first words out of her mouth were, Cujo, our IT team here, it sucks. Like, this is hilarious. Couldn't have scripted that any better than it went. I said, well, you realize they were just here and they seem really nice. Why do you indict them as such? And she goes, well, Cujo, I come out of my office last Thursday. And imagine my amazement to see that we've got 4 TVs that we didn't ask for hanging from the ceilings, which means that IT must have been on site, and they're never on site. But are they still there? No. Did we know that they were coming? No. And that frustrates me. And I said, well, listen, don't worry, because this is, and I'm advocating for the IT team now. I said, this is going to help you, right? It's going to boost your sales. We're in the holiday sales season, it turns out, according to you. And now your marketing is going to be more efficient and therefore effective, driving up sales. So that ought to bring a smile to your face. And she says, wait a second, Cujo, you know my job better than I do? I'm like, all right, I'll shut up. She said, Cujo, here's my major frustration. I've got a trouble ticket with 12 items on it, which includes the fact that our cash registers don't work. And I've been beating that drum for weeks now. So to know that IT was on site and didn't meet my needs really frustrates me. I turned to the CEO and I said, what do you think the problem is here? And when I ask CEOs, what do you think the problem is there? The number one answer that I get is communication, lack of communication. Cujo, we need to fix communication. Not exactly. Those teams are practicing localized accountability because they're not a team of teams, and that's the real issue. When we're not a team of teams, we can set our own individual mission sets, and we can actually work counter to other teams in the same organization. And that causes the finger pointing, doesn't it? Unnecessary. Additional fractures in the midst of an already fractured society. That's not what we're looking for right now. And the absence of a shared mission focus affects everybody. And so maybe one of our thoughts, deliberations, whatever you want to call it, as we're driving to the next event today is, hey, is my team a team? Are my teams teams? And are we a team of teams with one shared mission focus? And if we can get there, I think that would be a worthy takeaway from today. You all agree? Good. On to the next part of the flight path, the centrality of a team's purpose. And as we talk about purpose, specifically team purpose, I would ask, how many fellow veterans do I have in the audience today? Please self-identify. Outstanding. Please rise now and be recognized by your peers for what you've done for our country. How about a round of applause for the veterans here? Any fellow Air Force veterans? You get extra credit for making good decisions. Okay, so here's now a thought for you. People enter the military for a number of different reasons. Some are pushed in, some are actually there against their will. I've seen it. Dad forced somebody to go do what it was that he did. The kid goes, but they don't want to. Some people are forced to by judicial mandate. The judge says you must serve, otherwise you're going to jail. Okay, so those are some of the outliers. And then you've got people that have different ambitions and they think that the military is going to help them, but it doesn't really matter why you show up, because on day one, everybody raises their right hand and they swear an oath. And they say that regardless of why we're here to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we take that oath, didn't we, as kids? Right? We were kids when we raised our right hands, which is kind of stunning. I was 17 years old when I raised my right hand, which means to me, it really didn't mean very much. I took that oath at the United States Air Force Academy. I knew that I was 4 years away from a degree. I knew that if everything went according to plan, I was still a couple more years away from flying on the front line. So the oath was one of those things that you had to get through in order to go to the next deal. Took the oath again, though, upon graduation. It meant a little bit more as a second lieutenant. It certainly meant more as a first lieutenant, because now I'm in an operational fighter squadron, and the oath means that potentially supporting and defending could involve dying on the front lines of our nation's defense. As a captain, for sure, I was doing those kinds of missions. As a major, now it became even more striking because I was a newlywed with a baby on the way. And so the implication of potentially supporting and defending meant that I was leaving somebody else behind in a lurch by themselves, which was tough. When I was a lieutenant colonel, there were 2 kids. When I was a colonel, there were 4. So every time it became much more meaningful to reaffirm that oath. But the point where it became most impactful in my life was as a squadron commander, where it was my job to send somebody else to potentially go die for our country, and I wasn't going to be there. And that was the toughest thing that I had to do. Sending one of your sons or daughters, one of your brothers or sisters, one of your dear friends to go downrange to who knows what. And there's a day in my command tour that stands out in my mind. It was a Monday afternoon, late in the afternoon, where my boss comes to me. I'm a commander of an F-22 fighter squadron. And he says, Cujo, I know that you're 11 weeks away from an international deployment, our first in the F-22, by the way. And you're going to do some really important stuff strategically for our country, by the way. And I know that you don't have enough pilots to get the job done because you're a startup entity. But guess what? One of those pilots isn't going with you. I need you, Cujo, by tomorrow morning to identify which of your pilots is going to leave on Friday to go to Mississippi for 3 months to learn how to fly a twin-engine propeller-driven aircraft so that they can go downrange to Afghanistan doing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance work for 6 months, and there's no guarantee they're going to come back to the Raptor. And as I put up my fists to fight my boss, because that was my duty, I thought, as a fighter squadron commander, he said, Cujo, this isn't a democratic process. I don't care about your opinion. This is a mission that we are going to accomplish. And if you can't give me the name of somebody, you're fired. And I will hire somebody who can do that job. That was a tough situation to be in. And as I thought through my limited number of pilots, the name that stood out to me as potentially the right one for this bad deal, it occurred to me what that meant to this individual. Now, let's talk real briefly about the F-22 program. And I know that the screen behind me kind of compresses things. You can't see the airplane in all of its true glory here, but you get the general sense. It's kind of a cool looking airplane, although it's not a St. Louis product, which I have issues with. And this airplane, the F-22 Raptor, it was designed to get in undetected. It's invisible to enemy radar so that we can achieve strategic effects and bring the pilot home safely. And I'm here as a former fighter squadron commander of one of these squadrons to testify to the fact that it works. And even just bringing these airplanes into a particular theater, it does good for us on a strategic level, and that's how we'll leave it. But in order to achieve the effects that the Raptor achieves, it comes at a cost, $154 million a copy. And there are no two-seat versions of this, so the first time that you fly it, the pucker factor is pretty high. All that you're thinking to yourself is, Cujo, don't screw this up, because we can't replace that with Team Teschner's funds. And because of the cost and because of shifting US strategy, we only bought 187 of these airplanes. And in the 7th Fighter Squadron, we eventually had 28. So that's 15% of your fleet. And we were about to take 12 of these across the Pacific Ocean to a place in the Far East to achieve strategic effects, which was about $1.85 billion worth of hardware, with a team that knew how special it was to be part of this, with a bunch of pilots who knew that there's never going to be that many of us that ever get the privilege to do this. And now I get to rip somebody out of this community and tell them they're going to go someplace else to do a mission that they don't enjoy and they never come back from. The pilot that I identified was already at home by the time that I gave him a call. It was late in the day. We agreed to meet in a parking lot. I think it was of a Walmart, for me to give him the bad news face to face. We're sitting there in this parking lot and I said, hey brother, here's what's happening, and I've picked you. And I was waiting for him to fight me back because his disposition was a difficult one. He's one of the reasons why I liked having him. He's the guy that you wanted to have on the front line on night one of the war. So I was expecting him to be angry. What did he do? He said, boss, copy all. I've got one request. I said, absolutely. What is it? He goes, do you mind if I take the next couple of days off to get my affairs in order? Think about that. A guy who immediately pivots to this new reality in an instant. What makes it possible for him to take that approach, I would argue, is he understood his purpose. He also understood what it meant to be part of Team Air Force. It was something bigger than each of us individually. He wasn't there just because of the airplane that he was flying. He was there to do something bigger than himself. And if the Air Force said we needed to go to Afghanistan to do it, he was willing to do it. That guy and I are still friends to this day, I'm proud to confess. He's also still doing brilliant work for us. He teaches young fighter pilots how to do the mission the right way, making sure that we never atrophy, making sure that we pass on from generation to generation the skills that keep us alive out there. Question for you, at the team level, are we committed to the team's purpose? Do we even know what the team's purpose is? Have we ever taken the time to identify the team's purpose? And something that I would offer about purpose, it has nothing to do with aspirations. It has zero to do with revenue. So what is purpose then? In short, it's the meaning and the impact of the work that we do. And it's the piece that inspires us to do it, even when we've got nothing left in the tank. Good. There's a couple of points on purpose. Now we'll shift into the importance of values and living them only always. And I forget who I was sharing this with. Maybe it was Jonathan. This summer, my family and I, we went out to Copper Mountain for our summer vacation. Colorado in the summertime, epically beautiful. We were at 10,000 feet elevation, only one nosebleed. It was great. Walking outside every day in the fresh mountain air. And yeah, we were pretty close, striking distance to my alma mater, the United States Air Force Academy. And so if we're close to the Air Force Academy, it would make sense to stop by just to go see what's going on over there. And with two kids in their teens, one junior and one freshman, you know, if they get inspired to go that would be even cooler, right? It worked. Both of the oldest guys are inspired to go to the Air Force Academy. The summer vacation worked exactly as planned. Things are on the up and up. But while we were at the Air Force Academy, I went down memory lane just a bit. And I remember an episode when I was going through basic cadet training that stands out in my mind as being very formative and very important to our conversation today. And I would like to summarize very briefly what the basic training experience is, one that everybody that raised their hand, stood up and was acknowledged for here today experienced as kids. Basic training, the ambition there is to take a disparate group of people from all kinds of different parts of society, break them down so they can be remolded, refashioned into the form of a soldier, a sailor, a Marine, an airman, a Coast Guardsman, a Guardian. And it's a painful process. Basic training is. Day one, if you're a guy, your head is shaved. If you're a gal, your hair is clipped uncomfortably close. Nobody likes how they look coming out of the barbershop. Everything that you arrive with is taken away from you. You issued everything down to your underwear. You're told where to be, when to be there. You've got a double time or run there. At the Air Force Academy, our shower standard was 1 minute. So if you're running all day long and you're taking a minute shower every morning, everybody stinks to high heaven. Remember that? Yeah. And you've got no control. And just to tell you how out of sorts you become in that experience, I remember in early August of 1991, as a 17-year-old kid, our upperclassmen who ran basic training giving us 2 minutes to ourselves one afternoon. And I thought I had arrived. I'm like, I'm a human being again. This is awesome. And I had one ambition in life, and it was to sit down. So I raced back to my dorm room just to sit because I was exhausted. And before my butt hits the seat cushion, guess what happens? The upperclassmen start banging on the doors and blowing their obnoxious whistles, which was our indication that we were late, which means we were about to be punished. And in that instant, I realized what a cruel joke this was. 2 minutes. What are you going to do at that time? So I'm standing outside of my door waiting to get yelled at for being late, but none of the upperclassmen were interested in me that afternoon. They were all congregated around my buddy, Basic Cadet John, down the hall to my left. Why? At a time when everybody stank to high heaven, John came out of his room smelling like chocolate. Chocolate was contraband, not allowed to have it in basic training, even in the Air Force. The upperclassmen asked him, John, is that chocolate we smell on your breath? He had to say yes, because one of the things that we swore to do is to always tell the truth. They asked him where he got his chocolate from. He comes back out of his room with a Tylenol bottle. Now, the things that you remember when you're going down memory lane, I remember his girlfriend was from Olathe, Kansas. Couldn't tell you her name, though. And I remember this because he accused her of sending him this Tylenol. We were allowed to have anti-inflammatories, but because lovey-dovey in Olathe really dug John, she sends him a Tylenol bottle full of M&Ms. And John's the only one of us who used his time wisely. In his 2 minutes, he popped 3. Now the afternoon takes a decided turn for the worse. The upperclassmen, they're just a couple of years older than us. They're still kids themselves. They see, we get it. Basic Cadet John, you're different. You're special. And we honor that. And so on your program, what we're going to do for you is they brought out one of those comfy chairs into the hallway. They had him sit down on it. They brought out a stool for his legs. They said, we need to elevate your legs. It's going to help with circulation. That's important. They gave him his Tylenol bottle. They said, we want you to savor these delicious candy-coated chalks, but you can't savor this unless you have some entertainment. That's where your classmates are going to come in. They're going to do 200 push-ups for you so that you can thoroughly enjoy this experience. Now, to his credit, John jumps out of the chair. He's like, no, I must join my classmates. But then the upperclassmen said, no, you don't get a vote. This is a military organization. Sit your butt back down and eat these on our cadence. And then they turned to us. 200 push-ups, go. Now, we did push-ups every day. We knew how to do push-ups. But that afternoon, as I recall, somehow none of us was capable of doing a push-up correctly. For instance, even though my chest was touching the ground, I was told you're not going down far enough. That doesn't count. Do it over. 0. Even though my elbows were locked in the up position, I'm not going up high enough. That doesn't count. 0. And if the ambition was to get to 200, we never got to 1. You can imagine what that afternoon felt. As I recall, it lasted weeks, that afternoon did. Probably less than 10 minutes until all of us hit muscle failure. Hollywood would say that one of us ordered the code red on John that afternoon, right? That didn't happen. That didn't happen. John and I are best friends to this day. He's the godfather to my daughter, Lucy. I'm the godfather to both of his daughters, Genevieve and Violet. But he's angry at me right now for sharing this story with you. Why is this story relevant? Only because of this. Our upperclassmen were very wise kids. And they saw somebody who wasn't living their core values. And they found a really interesting way to teach us that around here, team is different. Around here, our core values mean something. Around here, it's not just committing those words to memory, but it's actively living them. If you don't know it, the United States Air Force has 3 core values: integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. And if the definition of integrity is doing what's right, even when nobody's looking, John breaks that when he goes back and violates our standard, eating 3 M&Ms in 2 minutes, doesn't he? And then he doesn't even give anybody else the opportunity to join him in breaking the rules. And so instead of being selfless, he's selfish. He breaks the two first core values of the United States Air Force, and our upperclassmen said, around here, that doesn't cut it. If you can't subordinate self-interest to the good of the team, then you don't belong, because in this team setting, we have to have 100% trust only always. That's a tough standard to meet, isn't it? But it's a necessary one when your airplane packs more firepower on it than an entire SEAL platoon carries into combat. We started in the summer of 1991 with 1,391 basic cadets. 4 years later, we only graduated 994. Some were kicked out, many voted with their feet. And that was good, because I promise you this, the 994 that walked across the stage saluting the commander-in-chief and shaking his hand, 100% trust that they were going to do things the right way, living their core values only always, which brings us to this picture, a much more svelte version, thin version, if you will, of me. Anybody here remember where you were September 11th of 2001? With this demographic, everybody does. I'll tell you where I was. I was there. Prince Sultan Air Base, Al-Kharj, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I was 27 years old. What was I doing on September 11th? I was planning the mission as the mission commander for all U.S. forces flying over southern Iraq the next day. That's all U.S. Navy coming out of the Gulf, all U.S. Army on call in Kuwait, all U.S. Air Force assets coming out of Saudi Arabia. I was the leader of that entire mission. 27 years old, I had a one-star general reporting to me. I was a captain. I got back to the hooch about 4:30 after a full day of planning for a 6-hour mission the next day. So about the time that I get back is where we're seeing, because we're 7 hours in advance of East Coast time, the second tower get hit, which leads to a night of restlessness. I mean, there's no way that you can sleep when you have no clue what's going on back home, Pennsylvania, DC, New York. What's going on? We're all thinking to ourselves. And how can we help? We're asking ourselves. And yet we know we're so far away that there's really nothing that we can do. Sleepless night. Next morning, I change out of a stinky flight suit into a new flight suit. I'm shaving. I'm asking myself, after 36 straight hours of being awake, can I go fly a 6-hour combat mission right now? My first words to myself were, no way. Are you kidding me? I'm exhausted. And then I asked myself, what happens if I take a knee today? What happens if I say I can't do this? Somebody else has to. Somebody else who's also exhausted gets to fill in for me. And that's not right. And that isn't excellence in all we do. I thought back to the Eminem episode. And it influenced me to say these words before we took off that day. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no idea why. All that we can do is ensure that we do our job correctly today to not make the commander-in-chief's job any more difficult. And we're going to be excellent in doing it. I'm happy to report that the mission went very well. Do we live our core values each and every day? Is it important to us? So important that when somebody doesn't, we call them out for it, nudge them in the direction of doing so correctly, hold them, dare I say, accountable for it. Which brings us to the fourth stage of our flight path today, accountability. The glue that keeps a team together, the inspiration that leads to trust if it's done correctly. And I mentioned being on the road constantly, right? I kind of lament it, and yet I also kind of enjoy it, because this is a message that needs to get out into the world, that despite the fact that so many of us see accountability as a negative, we have so much baggage associated with this term. The only reason for that is that we've never been taught how to do this thing correctly. We actually don't even know what it is. I ask CEOs weekly, what's accountability? And this is the definition they stumble with the most. And they start talking about practical examples. They start using the term in its own definition, which says to all of us, I've never thought about this before, Cujo, and I really don't have an answer for you. So for those of you that might be struggling with what is accountability defined, here's what I would tell you. It's taking absolute ownership of the outcomes that the team achieves. I say again, it's taking absolute ownership of the outcome that the team achieves. We measure it. We measure the degree of absolute ownership in corporations. And we do so on a 10-point scale. And usually the score that we get is somewhere between a 4.5 and a 5.5 on the degree of absolute ownership practiced in this particular organization. And when I ask CEOs, when I ask business leaders, are you satisfied with that? It's a universal no. And then when I ask CEOs, when I ask business leaders, is that an accurate score? They say, yeah, it's probably accurate. And then I ask them, hey, what kind of responses are you getting from the person on the other side of the table when you're calling them to account for performance that isn't up to par? And the number one answer that I get is excuses, defensiveness, victimhood, justification, counter accusations, blame, finger pointing, none of which is absolute ownership. And then I ask these smart leaders to ask themselves, if the standard is absolute, can you have a score of 4.5 to 5.5? And the simple answer is heck no. There's no shade of gray when the standard is absolute. You either have it or you don't. It's true or false. Then to this question, how much absolute ownership do we see in the world in which we operate today? Yeah, it's just not out there anymore, is it? So how do we get there? If we want to get to absolute ownership, we have to acknowledge the fact that we need to become countercultural in our organizations at the team level, which is an awfully noble ambition, isn't it? And it's a worthy one. Actually, I'd say it's the right one. It's the reason why I'm on the road so frequently, teaching people how to do it. And the essence of how we get there is to ritualize it. You want to get to absolute ownership. If you want to practice accountability the right way, it can't only be practiced after a failure. It's got to be practiced constantly. It's got to be woven into the fabric, the DNA of how it is that you do your work. No mission ends until we've practiced accountability for it. No day is complete until we hold ourselves accountable for how it went. And what's the means that we might practice? I say we embrace the debrief. Why? It's the only form of accountability that's appropriate for the world in which we live today, which is an awfully bold statement for me to make, but it's true. We live in a complex world. And because of that, we need to understand what a debrief is to appreciate why it's the way that we need to practice accountability. What's a debrief? It's the constructive evaluation of the quality of decisions and actions, not outcomes, measured against the objectives we set out to achieve. I say again, it's the constructive evaluation. If you look up constructive, it means positive, tending to build up evaluation of decision and action quality, not outcome quality, measured against our objectives. And the debrief is the way that a fighter squadron organizes to make tomorrow better than today, only always, even in the midst of the worst conflict known to man, combat. And the only way that we can make tomorrow better than today is to evaluate, why did today go the way that it did? When we won, we got to figure out why. Could have been because of luck. We'll take that. But if we're going to win tomorrow intentionally, we can't bank on luck as our strategy. We've argued we've got to change something about how we're organizing to do so. That's an important point. And then we get into this idea of it's decision and action quality, not outcome quality. And I'm saying this to people who track KPIs and metrics out the wazoo. I'm telling you right now, I don't care about any of them. They're almost irrelevant to me. Why? Because one of the implications of living in the midst of complexity is that you can make wonderful decisions and still lose. You ever been there? Yeah, when that happens, we say, man, we got unlucky today. And in that same environment, in the midst of complexity, you can make horrible decisions and still win. You ever been there? If that's the case, it means we are operating in an environment where so many influences are out there on the outcomes over which we largely have no control. And so therefore, the only thing that we can scrutinize is the quality of our decisions and actions, which means even if we've won, we've got to figure out, was it because of us or because of luck? And even if we lost, we have to ask ourselves, was it because of us or because we got unlucky? And it could be that we lost even just though we made brilliant decisions and took appropriate actions, in which case our best means of making tomorrow better than today is to do the exact same thing. Everybody here gets a copy of whatever. You get chapter 6 of my book, Debrief to Win. It's the methodology chapter, how it is that we organize in a fighter squadron to make tomorrow better than today, only always. I would encourage you to take some time to read it. Now, truthfully, this whole conversation at this point was a setup because I am at home right now, my adopted home of St. Louis. And every time that I'm here, I do like to, since we are talking about fighter squadrons, highlight my favorite experience in the Air Force, and that was flying F-15s, learning these principles while flying the world's greatest air superiority vehicle. And I'd just like to see a show of hands of anybody that here might be connected to McDonnell Douglas in any way. Anybody here have any connections through family to the company that built the world? Are you kidding me? Only one? Two? There we go. Okay, now we're starting to see it. Let me tell you, thank you. Thank you for what it is that your families did to build the airplane that I will love until the day that I die. Why? An F-15's got more equivalent thrust coming out of the back end of it than the entire starting lineup of the Indianapolis 500. On those days when you're coming to work tired, I promise you, you plug in the afterburners and you're awake. And the vehicle that I used to take into combat had 8 air-to-air missiles when I flew it, each valued at over $1 million a copy. They're designed to reach out and touch somebody. They work. The new version that Boeing launched in February has got 20. Oh, I'm so envious of the new generation of Eagle drivers. Anybody here like to shoot? Yeah, guess what? It's a great platform to shoot from. If you prefer 20mm rounds, that's my preference. We've got 940 coming out of a 6-barrel Gatling gun in the left wing root. When you pull back on the trigger, the entire airplane shakes in a good way. And it's centered around a radar that finds the bad guys before they know that we're there. And if you've got some energy on the airplane, who here has seen the movie about the B team that just came out? Top Gun Maverick, I think it's called. Anybody here? Yeah, spoiler alert. They make a big deal about going past 7.5 Gs. What I'll tell you about this airplane is we live at 9+. If you have some energy on the airplane, pull back on the stick, you're almost instantaneously there. One of the physiological ramifications is the blood races from your brain into your extremities, hands and feet. You've got to fight to stay awake while you're looking over both shoulders at the person who's trying to kill you and communicating over multiple radios. It's the funnest place to do work that I know. And I'll say again, this airplane is 104-0 in combat. They tell you when you go into the schoolhouse, don't be the jerk that ruins the ratio. Now, one thing that I don't appreciate about either Top Gun movie, and yeah, I've seen them both about 7 billion times, is this. The pilots get all the credit, all the glory. The movie's only about pilots. You see anybody else sort of in the background and for very short periods of time. What I would tell you is the only way that we can execute to the degree of precision that we do is to organize as a team of teams with one shared mission focus, where everybody is giving only their all constantly. Why? Because team comes first. The team of teams comes first. And we hold ourselves accountable for living our core values. If you don't, you're gone. And we practice accountability in a way that makes tomorrow better than today. I would go out to the flight line on an early morning, 3:30 a.m. brief time, 4:45, I'm walking out to the jet. And there's an 18-year-old kid saluting me saying, sir, she's ready for you. 100% trust that was true. I've got 2 dear friends, one of whom who works alongside me now at BMAX Group. He ejected out of a Raptor 1/1000th of a second before he died. The only reason why that ejection seat worked was because the kid that took care of it did their job correctly. Last time I crossed the Pacific Ocean, 19 air refuelings going out of Honolulu, Hawaii into Okinawa, Japan. It's my job to fly formation off the tanker. It's the kid's job to fly a boom into a receptacle behind my cockpit that I cannot see to make sure that I don't have to divert 2.5 hours to some atoll in the middle of nowhere. And the list of kids that are out there in the team of teams not getting credit for doing the job to make sure that my body makes it safely to wherever it is that I'm going goes on and on and on. It's the team of teams that allows me to be here today. But you know what I've noticed traveling around the world, teaching these principles? Sometimes we let self-limiting beliefs creep in. Audience members sitting here right now who are saying, hey, these are some nice stories. Thanks, Cujo, for your inspirational talk. Moving on to the next thing, but just so you know, this would never work around here because we're different. Like, we're not a bunch of fighter pilots in my company. Totally different demographic. They're not as capable as you were. Not even gonna bother trying. Don't do that to yourself. It's a big mistake. The principles that we're talking about are universally applicable, and I'll try to demonstrate that to you with the way that we end our conversation. Let's take a pivot. Let's go out of the military domain. Let's go into the family domain for just a moment. Why am I here, we might ask? Why today am I here doing this job when I loved flying airplanes so much? The very short story is, in 2014, I wake up from my colonoscopy downtown Stuttgart, Germany, as a lieutenant colonel on the headquarters U.S. European Command staff. The game plan is to get me back in the Raptor as a senior Air Force leader here in just a couple of months. But when I wake up from the colonoscopy, Dr. Myers got a tear in his eye, and his first words to me are these: Teschner, I'm so sorry. Not what you want to hear from any doctor in any language, right, when you wake up from a colonoscopy. And what he shares with me is this: I found a tumor in your lower colon. I think it's been growing for a decade. This is bad. We've got to excise it immediately. My wife's 6 months pregnant with our 4th child. She's not too happy about this. I'm not too happy about this. We know that life, as we understand it, just changed in an instant. And it's going to necessitate 2 horrific GI surgeries. Horrific GIs. We're going to get rid of most of my lower colon. I'm here to testify to this fact. My body does not work the way that it was originally designed. Life is harder these days because my system is not dependable. Here's a picture of me, day 1 after the first surgery. I got a smile on my face only because in the West, we typically smile when somebody points the camera in our face. The smile is only made possible by the morphine. A couple of things that I would highlight to you. I have been filleted from here all the way down to my groin. At this juncture, I've got 3 tubes coming out of my groin. I couldn't even tell you to this day what they were for. I've got a bag over here. That's where my upper intestine is feeding into. It'll do that for the next several months. It was a bad day. And on the heels of the second surgery, when they turned the plumbing back on, I found that I was trapped in a bathroom pretty much every hour of the day, every day of the week. And that's going to last for about 2 years. Miserable experience. In the midst of all of that, I asked myself, why in the hell am I still here if life is going to be this miserable? It was not fun. Didn't feel like it was very fair. And by the way, when my surgeon said I wouldn't recommend flying high-performance fighter aircraft, even if you could find some way to take the bag up there with you because you're going to rip apart from the inside, that didn't sound very sexy. Caused me to start working on applying principles that I learned back in the day into the business domain. I was inspired to do so. But as I started work on my first version of the book, Debrief to Win, I told the cancer story in that book. And I was told to remove the cancer story from the book, Debrief to Win, by none other than Michael Gerber, author of The E-Myth. He's my mentor. He wrote the foreword to the book. He said, cancer is a bummer. Nobody wants to read about that in business. Why did I incorporate my cancer story in the original version of Debrief to Win? Here's the answer. It was in writing the book that I started to practice accountability at home. It's in writing the book that I acknowledged the fact that the reason why I got the colonoscopy in the first place is that in 2013, I had very obvious symptoms that my body was not doing so well. But this was the second time in my life that I had these symptoms. It was the first time I ever talked about it, though. First time I had the symptoms was back in 2004. That's when I was a brand new instructor pilot at your fighter weapons school. That was back in my indestructible days. Those are back when I was bulletproof and nothing could take me down. Those are back in the days when I didn't trust doctors because they only existed to clip our wings. I wasn't about to tell a doctor that there might be something wrong with me. I didn't have time for that. And I didn't have time to talk to literally anybody else about it. So I didn't ask my parents about it and talk to my wife about it. Just kept it to myself. I willed myself to get better. 4 months later, the symptoms went away. I proved how I dominated my own body to myself. 10 years later, when they come back, I'm like, oh, this isn't good. That's important. First step of accountability is confronting the truth. And then you have to have a focus. You have to have a question that you're there to answer if you're going to practice accountability well. A question that I asked myself was, why did I allow myself to get to a position where I could no longer fly? Like, seems like it's a valid question. Why did I allow something that was probably treatable to get to a point where it no longer was, except for to take me out of the cockpit? Which necessitates doing some root cause analysis. Every debrief has root cause analysis baked into it. Root cause analysis means digging to get to a substantive answer. And as we dug, I realized very quickly the irony of my situation. And I wrote about this in the book as well. At a time when I was teaching high-performance teamwork principles to the best practitioners, arguably in the world, the United States Air Force, I wasn't practicing those at home. Like, to me, a mission orientation only existed at work, not at home. To me, having a centrality of a team's purpose was something that we did at work. We didn't do that at home. To me, core values are something that we were held accountable for living at work, not at home. And we didn't even practice accountability at home. And my reflection to my wife in that moment, because I made her a single parent for a couple of years, was this: I'm so sorry, Diane. Now, what's fascinating to me is when I apologized to her for what it is that I did to her, she came back and said, you goofball, who in their right mind practices high-performance teamwork principles in the home domain, especially as a young 30-year-old couple that's newlywed? Are you kidding me? That's an unrealistic standard. And by the way, it seems to me that you're looking backwards, not forwards. She goes, that's not what you preach about all the time. You say it's about making tomorrow better than today. She goes, what's done is done. That's water under the bridge. She had tremendous empathy. She also had a much higher state of awareness of my own practice than I did. She said this whole thing could actually be a blessing if we harness it the right way to make tomorrow better than today. And so then that leads us to what's our way forward. Our way forward was to center on teaching high performance team principles at home, which validated the fact that I'm the luckiest man on the planet because she said yes. Best wingman that I've ever flown with. Best flight lead that I've ever had the privilege to fly alongside. And we realized that we've got a mission in life, and it's to create a brood that's doing good in the world, centered around a family purpose. And allow me to be vulnerable for just a moment, a family purpose to get each other and our children to heaven. And that means living our values and holding ourselves accountable for doing it. And so my thesis is that if we can do this in the family domain, which we're actively doing day in and day out, then for sure we can do this at work. Something to reflect on. And proof positive, I think, that the self-limiting beliefs that we sometimes give into are incorrect. Tom, can I borrow 3 more minutes? Because you're not, Tom, we've got a yes. And the reason why I want 3 more minutes is to emphasize to you one more thing about my background. I chose the F-15 because I wanted to fly solo. I was sick and tired in pilot training of having somebody in my back seat when I was learning how to fly, giving me instruction about how to do it better. And after 13 months of that, I said, no more. I graduated #1 in my class so I could have the choice of what airplane to fly. And I picked the St. Louis-built single-seat fighter, the F-15, so that nobody would be there with me. Why is that relevant? And how come I have this picture up here? Only to let you know that this picture is a little bit incorrect because it's not just me in that room. I've got a roommate, which is exactly what I asked the Katharinen Hospital to make sure would not take place. My roommate was 85 years old, and I was miffed that he was there. And the night prior to the biggest event shy of my birth, when I walked into this hospital room and I saw that I had an 85-year-old roommate, I dropped off my luggage, I grabbed Diane's hand, we walked across the street to the Italian joint, and I had a big old glass of Chianti. The one upside about having GI surgery in Europe is that you can drink before it happens, yeah. Big glass of Chianti. Now, day 1 after the surgery, both my roommate and I are completely dependent upon others to live. Like we can't do anything for ourselves. We're just stuck there and life is hard. And at some point, Diane's got to go back and take care of our brood. And so it's just the 2 of us. And we're just sitting there chatting. And my roommate asks me in German, because I speak German. He says, hey, Herr Teschner, was machen Sie denn beruflich? What do you do professionally? I said, ich bin Pilot. I'm a pilot. He said, was fliegen Sie denn? What do you fly? I said, F-22, F-22s. He said, geil, das ist geil, that's cool. And then he says to me this, Herr Teschner, when I was younger, I was in the Hitler Youth. And my job was to man the anti-aircraft artillery battery in my village. It was my job to shoot down the bombers of the 8th Air Force. For those of you who don't know, that's your grandpa. You ever felt lonely in life before? I assure you, I felt incredibly lonely on the 8th floor of the Katharinen Hospital, stuck in a bed next to a Nazi who specifically shot down grandpa and friends. Oh, that wasn't too good. Now I'll take you fast forward to 2 o'clock the next morning. I have been writhing in pain for about 5 hours. The Germans aren't into pain medication. We knew that going in. I thought it was tough. 5 hours after the morphine wore off, I had reached a point where I was willing to die if I didn't get some more medicine. It was horrific. Words cannot describe how horrible it was. I finally hit the nurse call button. The one nurse that neither of us liked shows up. I'm like, gosh darn it, Lord, please, why? She said, what? I said, Miss, first of all, thank you for all the kind support that you're giving us. And secondly, if I could please get just a smidge more morphine, it's really bad right now. And she said, no, you're not getting anything, you're fine. I said, Miss, you don't understand. As I see it, 2 options, morphine or death. Let's go with option A. And she said, no, you're not getting anything else. At that moment, a voice chimes in from my right, 85-year-old voice specifically. Elderly gentleman says, Miss, I've been watching this young hero suffer silently for hours. And if he's telling you he can't take it anymore, I would encourage you to listen to him. Please get him some medicine. She puts her hands on her hips and she says, sir, I've been doing this job for 27 years. I know what he needs and what he does. He's not getting a thing. And my roommate says, Miss, I'm a former senior executive at Siemens. I know every decision maker in this hospital. If he doesn't get relief within the next 5 minutes, I assure you, tonight's your last night ever in this position. 5 minutes later, the morphine starts to flow freely and the death grip stops. You know what I would say about that particular situation? I was blessed to have a living guardian angel with me. At a time when I wanted to fly solo again, the good Lord recognized that I needed a teammate. Left to my own devices, I would not have had the means to survive that. The good Lord made sure that we practiced good teamwork. And I don't know necessarily what his idea of our mission was, but I can surmise that maybe he thought it was to get the hell out of there as fast as possible, to achieve a purpose of rejoining our families and to do good for them. And I don't know what his core values were by definition, but I know that he lived all kinds of goodness, to include being willing to take a risk for a stranger to help him out in need. And wherever he is in the world today, I pray that he gets extra credit for living honorably, which is why I'm passionate about teamwork. My final comment to you is this. Thanks for being here this morning, but today is a waste of time if it's only an event. In case you haven't noticed, you got a metaphorical zip file of information on how to build a stronger team even in about 56 minutes. Use it. And thank you for what you do to keep America's economy strong. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm done. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you kindly.
What do you think? Amazing, right? Can we all give Cujo a round of applause, please, for all of his service? Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Okay, Jason's going to get a picture of us here. So if you can all smile at the camera, and Cujo, if you could step in where we can get you as well. Just smile at Jace. We're going to post this on social media. My standing joke is if you're an ex-con or escaped criminal, you might want to just duck your head for this one. All right, thanks everyone, very much appreciated. So as a reminder, Cujo mentioned that he is handing out his free for chapter 6. So we're gonna send out a link in the email to the attendees only for today's event of chapter 6 of the book. So thank you very much for that, we really appreciate that. Our next event is November 11th with Rodney Miller. He's going to be talking about perfect aim. So how when you're at a firing range, you have to keep your end of your rifle in sight and the target out of distance in a fuzzy background. So you have to perfectly aim between the two, and you have to have near field goals as well as long-term goals. So it's going to be a great presentation there as well. There are feedback forms on your table. If you could complete those are very important to us with regards to what you want to see, what you thought of the event and everything along those lines. And lastly, please throw away your trash and recycle so we're protecting the planet. So I appreciate all of you being here. We will see you on November 11th. We'll be here again and we'll be streaming on LinkedIn Live again. So thank you all very much.